At 36, Mara Whitaker was already fighting to keep her family's struggling Eastern Oregon ranch alive when the one horse she could never imagine losing vanished overnight. Juniper wasn't simply Red Willow Ranch's most valuable mare. She was the last direct link to the horses Mara had bred with her mother before losing her 11 years earlier. Yet before sunrise one morning, Mara found Juniper's stall empty. The pasture gate was still latched. The visible fence line looked intact. There were no obvious trailer tracks, and nobody in the family admitted moving her. Then Mara noticed something even worse. Juniper's halter was missing too. With every hour that passed, the possibility of an accident became harder to believe, especially after Mara learned that her father and younger brother had secretly discussed selling Juniper to cover the ranch's mounting debts. Instead of waiting for the sheriff or accepting that the mare might already be gone, Mara made a decision that some people around her considered pointless. She would search every road, pasture, ditch, and neighboring property until she knew exactly what had happened. But the longer the family searched, the more their own secrets surfaced. Her brother had wanted Juniper sold. Her father had hidden how desperate the ranch finances really were. Mara's 15-year-old niece had entered the barn after midnight and initially refused to explain why. Soon the Whitakers were accusing one another, while neighbors began wondering whether there had ever been a missing horse at all, or whether somebody inside the family had quietly taken the money and invented the rest. Then the searchers found hoof marks near the ranch road, and for a few hours it seemed Mara's worst suspicion might be true. But those tracks led nowhere. What changed everything was something almost everyone had ignored. Juniper had been restless before she disappeared, staring not toward the road, but toward the dark rear boundary of the ranch. And when the family finally searched there, they found a small piece of fabric caught beyond thick brush, fabric that looked exactly like it had been torn from Juniper's missing halter. Someone in the Whitaker family had noticed the clue that would eventually lead them to the mare. But it wasn't Mara, her father, her brother, or any of the experienced ranchers searching beside them. It was the 8-year-old child everyone thought was too young to help. And what he remembered about Juniper would force the entire family to realize they had been looking in the wrong direction from the beginning. Before we find out what happened to Juniper, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? Whether you're starting your morning, working through the afternoon, or listening late at night. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and if you enjoy emotional ranch stories about horses, family secrets, and mysteries hidden in everyday country life, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Now, let's return to Red Willow Ranch just before sunrise. When Mara walked toward Juniper's stall and discovered that the horse she loved most was gone before sunrise. Mara Whitaker crossed the yard at Red Willow Ranch with a flashlight in one hand and 2 feed buckets knocking against her leg. The eastern Oregon sky was still black above the barns, and the only sounds were cattle shifting in the distance and wind moving through the dry grass beyond the corrals. She had done the same chores so many mornings that her body usually moved before her mind fully woke. Juniper's stall was third on the left. Mara reached for the latch, then stopped. The stall door was already open. Inside, the bedding had been disturbed, but the mare was gone. Mara set down the buckets. Juniper? She checked the adjoining turnout first. Empty. The water trough reflected her flashlight. No horse. She walked faster toward the pasture, expecting to find the buckskin mare standing near the fence with the others. 2 geldings lifted their heads as Mara approached. Juniper was not with them. The main pasture gate was closed and latched. Mara tested it twice. Solid. She followed the nearest stretch of fence with the beam of her flashlight. Posts stood upright. Wire appeared intact. Nothing obvious suggested a horse had broken through. "Caleb!" she shouted toward the house. A porch light came on moments later. Her younger brother emerged, pulling on a jacket. "What happened? Where's Juniper?" Caleb frowned. "What do you mean? Did you move her?" "No." "Did Sophie?" "Not that I know of." Ray appeared behind him, already wearing his boots. At 67. Mara's father moved slower than he once had, but the alarm in her voice had brought him fully awake. "What's wrong?" "Juniper's missing." Within minutes, all three were searching the barn, adjoining pens, equipment sheds, and the nearer pasture. Mara checked places she knew made no sense simply because she needed to eliminate them. The mare was not in the cattle pens, not behind the hay barn, not in the small exercise paddock. Darkness made the ranch feel twice its normal size. Every gate became a question. Every shadow looked briefly like a horse. Mara returned to Juniper's stall and stared at the empty feeder. On the wall outside hung 3 halters. There should have been 4. Juniper's brown leather halter was missing. Mara's stomach tightened. "Dad." Ray came over. She pointed at the hooks. "Her halter's gone." Caleb joined them. "Maybe somebody put it somewhere else." Mara turned on him. "Who? I don't know. That's the point." She stepped into the stall and ran one hand across the wooden partition. Juniper had been born on Red Willow 7 years earlier. From the last mare Mara's mother, Elise, had chosen for the ranch breeding program. Mara remembered standing beside her mother over bloodline records at the kitchen table, both of them arguing over temperament and conformation as if nothing in the world could change. Elise died 11 years ago. Most of those horses were gone now. Juniper remained. Mara looked at the untouched feed bucket outside the stall and felt something colder than fear settle in her chest. Caleb said, "We need daylight before we can search the outer sections properly. She didn't vanish into air. I didn't say she did. The gate's latched. The fence looks fine. Her halter is missing." Ray rubbed a hand over his face. "Nobody here moved her." Mara looked from her father to her brother. "Then somebody did." Caleb's expression hardened. "Don't start." "Start what?" "Assuming the worst before we know anything." "My horse is gone. I can see that. Can you?" The question came sharper than Mara intended. Caleb stared at her for a moment, then looked away. Ray said, "Enough. We search first." They split up as the first gray light began to show along the horizon. Mara checked the ranch road and the loading area, but darkness still hid more than it revealed. When she returned to the barn, Caleb was waiting beside Juniper's empty stall. He looked uncomfortable now, not angry, Mara noticed immediately. What Caleb hesitated, "There's something you should know." "About Juniper?" "Maybe." Mara stepped closer. "Say it." Caleb glanced toward Ray, who had just entered the aisle. 3 days ago, Dean Mercer made an offer on her. Mara went still. "What offer?" Caleb met her eyes. "Enough money that Dad and I talked about selling her." Mara stared at Caleb. "You talked about selling Juniper." "We talked about the offer." "Without me." Ray stepped between them before Caleb answered. "Dean saw her work when he was here last week. He asked what we'd take." "And what did you tell him?" "That she wasn't listed for sale." "That isn't what Caleb just said." Caleb folded his arms. "I said we should consider it." Mara laughed once, without humor. "Of course you did. Hay costs are up again. The irrigation repair wasn't optional. We've had 2 dry years. So you decided my horse was the solution? She's one of the most valuable animals on this ranch. She's not inventory to me. Everything here costs money, Mara." Ray raised his voice. "Nobody sold Juniper." Mara turned toward him. "Did you accept Dean's offer?" "No." "Did you call him after he left?" "No." "Did Caleb ask me?" Caleb snapped. "Mara did." "No," he said. The answer did little to settle her. They walked to the loading area as daylight spread across Red Willow. The packed dirt around the trailer access held overlapping tire marks from ranch trucks, but nothing looked freshly churned. Mara crouched near the gate, searching for the paired tracks a loaded horse trailer might leave in softer ground. Caleb examined the road shoulder. If Dean came in last night, he'd have had to turn around here. Unless someone led her out to the road. For what reason? You tell me. Caleb's jaw tightened. Ray moved farther down the ranch road looking for prints. They found nothing useful. The dry ground had held little moisture for weeks, and normal ranch traffic had hardened the surface. Still, Mara saw no sign of a truck and trailer arriving overnight. That should have relieved her. Instead, it widened the problem. By 7, they had searched the nearest pastures, cattle pens, hay sheds, and irrigation lane. The ranch stretched beyond them in dry grass. Low ridges and rough ground that could hide a horse for hours, Mara called neighboring properties while Ray drove the eastern fence line. Caleb checked stock ponds and access roads. No one had seen Juniper. Mara returned briefly to the barn. Sunlight now filled the empty stall, making the absence harder to deny. She picked up Juniper's feed bucket and remembered Elise sitting at the kitchen table 11 years earlier, tracing a mare's pedigree with one finger. Good feet, good mind, her mother had said. That matters more than pretty. Juniper had been born years after Elise died, but she came directly from that breeding line. Mara had trained her from the first halter lesson onward. Losing her felt like watching another piece of Elise disappear. Caleb entered behind her. Mara, don't! You think I don't know what she means to you? You wanted to sell her because I'm trying to keep Red Willow alive. She turned. And I'm not. You act like the horse side of this ranch is protected from every hard decision. I work those horses every day. That's not what I said. No, you just discussed selling them when I'm not in the room. Ray returned before the argument could deepen. Nothing along the east fence. Mara looked at him. How much did Dean offer? Ray named the amount. It was enough to make her understand why Caleb had listened. Enough to cover a painful portion of immediate ranch expenses. That realization made her angrier. And you seriously considered it? Ray sighed. I considered a number. I did not sell your horse. Then where is she? Nobody answered. They'd searched the loading area again, then the county road in both directions. A horse could be led to another pickup point, but that required planning. Mara kept returning to the missing halter. Someone had either taken it with Juniper or put it on her before she disappeared. Near mid-morning, Hannah drove back from checking a neighboring pasture. Sophie sat beside her, pale and unusually quiet. Hannah got out and pulled Mara aside. There's something I need to tell you. Mara's chest tightened. What Hannah glanced toward her 15-year-old daughter. Sophie wasn't asleep all night. What does that mean? I heard her come back into the house when, after midnight, Mara looked at Sophie. The girl dropped her eyes. Hannah continued quietly. She'd been in the barn. Mara waited until they were inside the barn before asking Sophie again. Why were you here after midnight? Sophie stood beside an empty tack trunk with her arms folded tightly. I just came out for a minute. To do what? Nothing. People don't walk to the barn after midnight for nothing. Caleb stepped closer. Mara, give her a second. Juniper disappeared sometime between then and sunrise. Sophie may have been the last person who saw her. Sophie's face changed. I didn't take her. I didn't say you did. You're looking at me like I did, Hannah said softly. Just tell us what happened. Sophie stared at the floor. Juniper was there when I left. Mara's anger gave way briefly to urgency. You saw her? Sophie nodded. In her stall? Yes. Was she wearing her halter? I don't remember. Was anyone else here? No. Did you open any gates? No. Then why were you here? Sophie pressed her lips together and said nothing. Mara tried to control her voice. "This matters." "I know. Then help me. I already told you she was here, and you're refusing to tell me why you were—" Sophie looked up. "Because it's none of your business." Caleb stepped between them. "Enough!" Mara backed away, furious at the wall of secrecy surrounding a horse that had somehow vanished from a closed ranch. Within the hour, the search expanded. Luis Ortega arrived from the neighboring ranch and helped organize sections so they would not waste time covering the same ground. Caleb took the western pastures. Ray drove the county road again. Mara and Luis checked drainage ditches, unused pens, low ground, and neighboring fields. They called out, stopped to listen, then moved on. The soil gave them almost nothing. Dry weeks had baked exposed ground hard, while the ranch yard was layered with old hoof prints, truck tracks, and cattle traffic. "If somebody led her out," Mara said. "We should find something." Luis crouched beside a dusty patch near a gate. "Maybe. Or we find 50 tracks and convince ourselves one is hers." Mara disliked the answer because it was true. By noon, she called Dean Mercer. He answered on the third ring. "I heard you're missing a mare. Who told you Caleb called this morning asking whether I'd seen her?" Mara glanced toward the distant pasture where her brother was searching. "Did you come back to Red Willow last night?" "No." "Did you send anyone?" "No." Dean sounded offended rather than nervous. "I made an offer, Mara. I didn't steal your horse." "He said he had driven back to Idaho after visiting another ranch and had not returned." "He offered to send the fuel receipt and motel information if she wanted it." Mara hated that part of her wanted proof. "If you hear anything, call me." "I will, by afternoon." No sighting had come from neighboring ranches. A loose buckskin mare should have attracted attention near a road. If Juniper had remained on Red Willow, hundreds of acres of uneven country still had to be searched. Mara returned to the barn for water and found Sophie brushing dirt from a saddle that did not need cleaning. "You said Juniper was there when you left?" "She was." "Was she normal?" Sophie hesitated. "Not exactly." Mara set down her bottle. "What does that mean?" "She was restless." "How?" "Moving around. Listening." "To what? I don't know." Sophie's irritation returned. "I was only there a few minutes." "Did she seem frightened?" "Maybe nervous." "Why didn't you say that before?" Sophie dropped the brush onto the trunk. "Because every time I say something, you make it sound like evidence." Mara stared at her. "A horse is missing, Sophie. I know. I love her too." "Then stop hiding things." Sophie's eyes filled, but her voice sharpened. "You trust horses more than you trust anyone in this family." The words landed harder than Mara expected. Before she could answer, Sophie walked out. Mara remained beside the empty stall, listening to the horses farther down the aisle shifting in their bedding. She had spent years believing that if she watched closely enough, worked hard enough, and remembered every gait and feeding time, she could prevent bad things from happening. Juniper's empty stall mocked that belief. Late in the afternoon, Ray called everyone back to the house to compare search areas. No one had found anything useful. Caleb marked checked sections on a ranch map. Hannah listed neighbors contacted. Luis suggested widening the search at first light if Juniper remained missing. Mara went to the kitchen drawer looking for an older property map showing an access track beyond the western pasture. The drawer held receipts and machinery manuals. She opened the cabinet beneath it instead. A folder slid forward and spilled papers across the floor. Mara crouched to gather them, then stopped. Bank statements, loan notices, irrigation invoices. Several were marked overdue. She read the figures twice. They did not match what Ray had told her about Red Willow's finances. Behind her, the kitchen doorway creaked. Ray stood there. His expression told her before he spoke that the papers were not a misunderstanding. Mara held up the statements. How long have you been hiding this from me? Ray looked at the papers in Mara's hand and closed the kitchen door behind him. Since spring. These loan notices go back farther than spring. The real trouble started then. Mara spread the statements across the table. Irrigation repairs, feed invoices, loan payments, equipment costs. The numbers were worse than she had imagined. You told me we were tight. We are. This isn't tight. We're burning through reserves. Caleb entered with Hannah and stopped when he saw the papers. Mara looked at him. You knew some of it. How much? Enough. Apparently everyone gets to know what's happening on this ranch except me. Ray pulled out a chair. 2 dry years hurt us. Hay went up. Then the irrigation line failed. I thought we could absorb it, and when you couldn't, Caleb answered. We started looking at options. Mara understood before he said more. Juniper, Dean's offer would cover a meaningful part of what's due, so you did more than casually discuss it. Ray shook his head. I considered the offer. I never accepted it. Show me. Ray's expression hardened. Mara, if there was no sale, show me. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Ray went to the small desk in the adjoining room and returned with a sheet of paper. Dean Mercer's written offer was straightforward identification of Juniper. Proposed price, basic conditions, space for signatures. The signature lines were blank. Mara checked both pages. Nothing suggested acceptance. There, Ray said. I thought about it. I didn't sell her. One question was answered, but relief did not come. Why hide the accounts? Because I was trying to fix them. By yourself? It's my ranch. Caleb gave a bitter laugh. That's rich. Ray glared at him. Not now. No. On is exactly when we apparently say everything. Caleb turned to Mara. Dad didn't tell you because every time anyone mentions cutting costs around the horses, you act like we're a cacking mom. Mara stood. Don't bring her into this. She's already in it. Juniper is untouchable because of her. Half the horse operation is treated like the rest of Red Willow has to support it no matter what. I manage that operation. I know. I also know what hay costs, and I know what those horses bring in. Not enough every year. Ray struck his palm against the table. Stop. Silence followed. Mara looked at her father, then at Caleb. For years, she had worked before sunrise, handled breeding records, trained horses, repaired tack, scheduled farriers, and stepped into whatever job needed doing. She had believed that made her part of every important decision. Apparently, it had not. You let me work like everything was manageable, she said to Ray. I was trying to keep it manageable. That isn't the same thing as telling me the truth. Ray's face softened with exhaustion. I didn't want you carrying another problem. You don't get to decide which problems I'm allowed to carry. Caleb leaned against the counter. And you don't get to decide every hard choice is betrayal. Mara looked at him. My horse disappeared hours after 2 people in this room considered selling her. What conclusion would you like me to reach? The one supported by evidence. He pointed at Dean's unsigned offer. Dad didn't sell her. I didn't sell her. Dean says he never came back. Maybe stop trying to make one of us guilty long enough to find the horse? Mara wanted to answer, but Hannah quietly said, He's right about one thing. Juniper is still missing. That pulled them back to the immediate problem. They returned outside and divided the remaining daylight. Financial pressure now made every ordinary detail feel suspicious to Mara. An unlocked equipment shed, a truck moved from its usual position, a gate someone remembered closing but could not swear to. Yet none produced Juniper. Near evening. Luis called from the ranch road. Mara drove out with Caleb and found him crouched beside a dusty shoulder beyond the main entrance. I've got something, he said. In a thin strip of softer dirt were several hoof impressions. Mara knelt. They were incomplete, but one showed the broad curve of a horseshoe. "Which direction?" she asked. Luis pointed along the road. The marks appeared to angle away from Red Willow. Caleb studied the ground ahead. "They disappear on the hard surface." Mara walked 20 yards, searching both shoulders. Nothing. If the tracks were junipers, they could support the possibility that someone had led her toward a pickup point away from the ranch loading area. If they belonged to another horse, they had lost more time. Behind them, Ray's truck approached. Mara looked again at the faint impressions. "We follow them as far as we can." The trail survived only another few yards before vanishing completely. Luis remained crouched over the last print, studying its edges. "Mara," he said carefully, "don't decide what these mean yet." She looked toward the empty county road. Somewhere beyond Red Willow, her mare had been gone nearly an entire day, and for the first time, they had hoof marks leading away from home. At first light the next morning, Mara and Luis returned to the hoof marks beside the county road. The cooler air sharpened their edges, but not enough to make them certain. Luis crouched over the clearest print, while Mara searched farther along the shoulder. "Could be juniper," she said. "Could be." "You don't sound convinced." Luis pointed to the dry, crumbling edge. "Because I don't think these were made last night." Mara looked again. "How old?" "Hard to say, but older than we want them to be. Horses occasionally traveled this road with neighboring ranchers. The marks could belong to any of them. They followed both shoulders for nearly a mile and found nothing that continued the trail. No fresh manure, no scrape from a shod hoof, no place where a horse had obviously left the road. By mid-morning, Luis stopped. "We're following what we hope is evidence." Mara hated abandoning the first physical clue they had found. But she knew he was right. Dean Mercer removed another suspicion himself. He called Mara and sent photographs of receipts showing where he had been, along with the motel record he had offered the day before. His timeline kept him away from Red Willow through the night Juniper vanished. "I'd still buy that mare if you ever wanted to sell," Dean said, "but I didn't take her." Mara believed him now. That should have narrowed the search. Instead, it left her with fewer explanations. When she returned to the ranch, Sophie was carrying water into the barn. Mara stopped beside her. "I owe you an apology." Sophie kept walking. "For which part?" "For treating you like you were hiding something about Juniper." Sophie set the bucket down. "I was hiding something?" "Then tell me." The girl glanced toward the house. "Owen came out here that night." Mara stared at her. "Your brother? He had a nightmare. He does that sometimes. He came looking for me because he thought I might be with the horses. He's 8. "Sophie." "I know. That's why I didn't tell you. I didn't want Dad getting mad at him." Sophie had found Owen inside the barn and walked him back to the house. She had returned briefly to make sure everything was secure. Juniper was still in her stall then. "You could have told me yesterday." "You were already accusing everybody. Mara had no defense for that. I'm sorry." Sophie looked at her for a moment, then nodded once. It was not forgiveness exactly, but it was a beginning. They found Owen near the porch with a toy tractor in the dirt. Mara sat on the step rather than standing over him. "Sophie told me you were in the barn that night." Owen immediately looked worried. "I wasn't doing anything." "I know. I just need you to remember Juniper." He thought carefully. "She was awake. Was she scared? I don't know. She kept moving. Did you hear anything?" Owen frowned. "Wind and thunder, I think." Mara looked toward Sophie. "Thunder." Sophie nodded slowly. "Far away. I barely noticed it." "Anything else?" Mara asked Owen. "Juniper kept looking somewhere." "Where?" He turned and pointed past the barn, away from the ranch road. "That way, toward the rear boundary." Mara felt the direction settle in her mind. All morning she had been following tracks toward the road because that was where a person taking a horse would go. Juniper had been watching the opposite direction before she vanished. Caleb joined them after checking another pasture. Mara told him what Owen remembered. "There was wind," Caleb said. "I heard it against the bedroom window." "You remember lightning?" "No. But I was asleep most of the night." Luis returned near noon, and Mara explained the new timeline. Juniper had still been in her stall after midnight. She had been restless. Wind and distant thunder had passed through the area. After Sophie brought Owen inside, nobody checked the barn again until Mara arrived before sunrise. Luis studied the sky, where clouds were gathering over the distant ridges. "Maybe we've been asking the wrong question." "Which is," Mara asked, "not who took her. What made her leave?" Mara glanced toward the rear of Red Willow. "The gate was latched, then we check everything else." A faint breeze moved dust across the yard. Luis looked toward the clouds again. "And we should do it soon. Forecast says light rain later." Mara thought about 2 days spent searching roads, questioning family, and imagining trailers that had left no tracks. She looked toward the dark line of brush along the rear boundary, the direction Owen said Juniper had been staring. Luis picked up his jacket from the truck. "Before we search another mile for a thief," he said, "let's reconstruct that storm." Mara spread a ranch map across the hood of Caleb's truck, while Luis checked the weather record on his phone. The night Juniper disappeared, a dry thunderstorm had passed several miles north of Red Willow. Most of the rain had missed them, but the system had carried strong gusts and scattered lightning. There was a strike close enough to hear. Luis said, "Not on the ranch, but close." One stood beside Sophie, listening. "I told you there was thunder." "You did," Mara said. She looked toward the barn and replayed the timeline. Owen had entered after midnight. Sophie had found him. Juniper was still in her stall, restless and watching toward the rear of the property. Sophie brought Owen back to the house. Then the wind strengthened. By sunrise, Juniper was gone. Caleb tapped the map. If something spooked her, the stall door still had to open, unless someone left it unsecured. Mara said. Caleb looked at her. "You checking for a person again?" The question was calm, but she heard what sat beneath it. "I'm checking every possibility." "So am I." Mara closed her eyes briefly. They had wasted too many hours turning possibilities into accusations. "Fine. We start with the turnout and rear fence. The small turnout behind Juniper's stall connected through a side gate used when horses needed space overnight. Mara remembered leaving that gate open before going to bed because Juniper had been restless in warm weather before. The outer turnout fencing should still have contained her. They inspected the stall latch first. Nothing broken. The door could have swung wider if Juniper pushed through from inside, but only if it had not fully caught. Mara could not remember checking it herself that evening. That uncertainty bothered her more than she admitted. Behind the barn, the turnout ground was hard and dry. Old hoof marks overlapped one another. Caleb walked the perimeter while Mara checked posts and wire. Everything visible looked intact. "Same as the first morning," she said. Louise pointed toward the rear corner. "Not all of it's visible. Thick rabbit brush and dried grass covered part of the fence line where the turnout met the larger back pasture. Beyond that, the land dipped toward rougher ground." Mara pushed into the brush. Branches scratched her sleeves. "If a horse went through here, we'd know." "Maybe," Louise said. "If we could see the fence," Caleb joined her. Pulling vegetation aside, the wire behind it still appeared upright. They followed the boundary slowly, checking each post by hand. Halfway along, Mara found fresh-looking disturbance in the brush. Several thin branches had snapped. Dry grass had been pressed down. "Here." Caleb crouched beside her. "Could be cattle. They don't use this turnout." Then, Luis examined the soil beneath the brush. "Or a horse." Mara searched for a clear print but found only disturbed dust. The ground was too hard to hold detail. She felt frustration rise. "We should have checked this properly the first morning." Caleb straightened. "We checked the fence. We looked from the outside." "Because we were searching hundreds of acres? Because I thought somebody took her?" Caleb said nothing. That silence was worse. Mara looked at him. "Say it." "You already did." She turned away. For 2 days, she had demanded explanations from everyone else while treating her own assumptions like facts. If Juniper had been frightened and escaped on her own, every hour spent pursuing Dean, questioning Sophie, and fighting over the ranch accounts had been an hour not spent reading the horse. "I may have wasted time," Mara said quietly. Caleb's expression softened, but only slightly. "We all did." "No, I pushed it." "Then help find her now." It was not forgiveness, but it was enough. They continued along the boundary. Luis found another patch of bent vegetation. Caleb noticed bark freshly scraped from a low branch. None of it proved anything, but together it suggested movement through the rear corner. Clouds thickened overhead. The forecasted rain arrived earlier than expected. First as scattered drops darkening the dust, Mara looked down at the ground. If there are tracks out here, this could wash them out, or soften the surface enough to show us something. Luis said. Rain began tapping through the brush. They moved faster, spreading several yards apart while staying along the fence. Mara searched every clump of grass for hair, every post for a scrape, every patch of earth for a hoof edge. Caleb was 20 feet ahead when he stopped. Mara, she pushed through the brush toward him. What? He pointed beyond the visible fence line. Something narrow and dark hung from a thorny branch on the far side. At first, it looked like bark. Caleb reached carefully through the wire and pulled it free. A short strip of brown material, wet now from the rain, lay across his palm. Mara touched it once. The color, stitching, and worn edge were familiar. She had handled the same leather every morning for years. That's from Juniper's halter. Mara took the strip of leather from Caleb and turned it over in her palm. The stitching matched Juniper's halter exactly, including the darker patch where Mara had repaired it the previous winter. She came through here, Mara said. Luis pushed farther into the brush, following the fence. Rain softened the dust beneath their boots and darkened the dry grass. 20 yards beyond the torn leather, the vegetation thickened around an old cottonwood that leaned toward the boundary. At first, the fence still looked intact. Then Caleb pulled aside a curtain of rabbit brush. Here, a heavy cottonwood limb had broken high above and fallen into the brush. Most of its weight now rested low against the ground, hidden from anyone looking along the fence from the pasture. Beneath it, 2 strands of wire sagged nearly to knee height. One post tilted outward. Mara crouched and followed the damage with her eyes. The limb pushed the wire down, probably during the wind. Luis said, then shifted after. Caleb pointed to scraped bark and strands of buckskin hair caught near the wire. A frightened horse could force through that. Mara touched the hair. Her chest tightened. There was no trailer, no secret buyer, no family member leading Juniper away in darkness. She had been here, scared and alone, pushing through a gap nobody had noticed. The halter snagged. Mara said. Luis nodded. Looks that way. Caleb searched beneath the branch and found another small piece of leather caught near a broken twig. Probably tore when she pulled free. Mara stood slowly. For 2 days, she had looked at everyone she loved and asked what they were hiding. Some of them had been hiding things. Ray had hidden the ranch finances. Caleb had discussed selling Juniper. Sophie had protected Olin. Those secrets had been real, but none had caused the mare to disappear. Mara looked toward Caleb. I was wrong. He gave a tired shrug. About the fence? About you? Rain gathered on his hat brim. He looked away toward the broken boundary. You weren't completely wrong. I did want Dad to consider selling her. Mara waited. Caleb exhaled. I wasn't trying to get rid of something Mom left you. I was scared we were going to lose all of Red Willow while pretending we could save every part of it. You should have told me. I know. And I should have listened before deciding what it meant. Caleb nodded once. Probably. It was the closest either of them had come to saying what the argument had really been about. Mara looked at the fallen limb again. I treated you disagreeing with me like you'd betrayed me. You've done that before. I know. Caleb almost smiled. That sounded painful. Don't enjoy it, Luis called from beyond the fence. Save the family therapy. I've got movement. They ducked carefully under the damaged section and entered the rough ground beyond Red Willow's boundary. The rain had begun to soften patches of bare soil. Near a clump of grass, Luis pointed to a shallow depression. Not a full print, but the rounded edge was the right size for a horse hoof. Several feet farther on, another disturbance angled downhill. Mara followed it toward a seasonal creek bed that twisted away from the ranch. She went this direction. Caleb looked ahead. Maybe. Where does the wash lead now? Eventually south, then toward the old winter country. The creek was mostly dry this time of year, little more than a shallow channel between brush and low banks. It offered easier footing than the rocky slopes around it. Mara stepped into the wash and searched for prints. The rain was both helping and hurting them. Freshly softened soil could reveal where a horse had passed, but every heavier shower blurred whatever evidence had survived the previous 2 days. They spread out carefully. Luis found one more partial hoof mark near the edge of the creek, then nothing. Mara moved another 50 yards, scanning ahead. Juniper could have followed this for miles. Caleb said, or left it anywhere. The scale of the search returned all at once. Knowing how Juniper escaped answered one question, but created another. Beyond the ranch were rough draws, open grazing land, old cattle routes, and sheltered pockets hidden from the roads they had already searched. Mara felt the familiar urge to choose a direction and push everyone forward. This time, she stopped herself. Behind them, voices approached. Hannah had brought Sophie and Owen down after hearing they had found the broken fence. Owen stood near the sagging wire, staring along the creek bed. Mara walked back toward them. We know how she got out, she said. The storm dropped a branch on the fence. She pushed through. Sophie looked relieved. Owen did not. He kept staring away from the county road and toward the winding wash. What Mara asked. Owen glanced at the adults, then at the land ahead. You keep looking where somebody would take her. Mara waited. Owen pointed down the old creek bed. You're looking where people would go, not where Juniper would. Mara looked at Owen instead of dismissing him. Where would Juniper go? Owen shrugged at first, suddenly aware that every adult was listening. I don't know exactly. That's okay. Tell me what you meant. He pointed down the seasonal creek bed. You said scared horses don't think like people. Mara frowned. When did I say that? When we looked for Mr. Ortega's gelding last year. Luis glanced at her. He remembers better than I do. Owen continued. You said if a horse gets scared, it might look for water or other horses. Or somewhere it feels safe. Mara remembered the afternoon now. Luis's gelding had slipped through a gate and been found near cattle at a stock pond. She had explained the search to Owen while he followed her around asking questions. At the time, she had barely noticed he was listening. Shelter, Mara said. Water. Familiar animals. Easier terrain. Owen nodded. Caleb looked down the wash. This creek's dry, mostly. Mara said, but Juniper wouldn't know where water stops until she followed it. Luis crouched beside the partial hoof mark they had already found. And a creek bed gives a frightened horse a natural line to travel, Mara studied the map in her mind. The seasonal creek curved south through rough ground before approaching the old winter cattle country. A sheltered canyon, Red Willow had once used more regularly. There are cattle farther that way sometimes, Owen said. Caleb looked at him. Not ours right now. But Juniper doesn't know that. Mara felt something shift. For 2 days, the adults had searched roads, gates, neighboring ranches, loading points, places defined by human movement. Even after finding the broken fence, she had immediately thought in terms of distance rather than instinct. "We follow the creek," she said. Hannah glanced at the darkening sky. "How far?" "As far as daylight safely gives us," Sophie asked. "Can we help?" Mara almost said no automatically. Then she looked at Owen. "You stay with us. Nobody wanders off. If the ground gets bad, you turn back when I say." Owen nodded seriously. The group moved down the wash, Mara and Louise taking the lead while Caleb watched the higher bank. Rain had transformed the hard dust into a thin layer of mud, making footing slippery but giving them a new chance at tracks. They found deer prints first, then cattle sign old enough to have softened at the edges. Every few minutes Mara stopped and listened. Wind moved through sage and grass. No horse answered. After nearly half a mile, the creek narrowed between low banks. Mara began to wonder whether they had simply chosen another hopeful direction. Then Owen called from behind her. "Mara!" She turned quickly. "Stay where you are." He pointed near the edge of the wash. "That one looks different." Mara walked back. In a patch of newly softened soil was a small hoof impression. Rain had blurred the heel, but the shape was unmistakably equine. Luis knelt beside it. "Fresh?" Caleb asked. "Not fresh today," Luis said. "Could have been here before the rain." Mara searched ahead and found another faint depression several yards farther down. "The direction followed the creek," her pulse quickened. "This is better than the road tracks." Luis nodded. "Much better." They continued. Slower now. Mud clung to their boots. Sophie held Owen's hand over a rocky section, and Mara watched them without comment. The light was fading behind the clouds. They had perhaps an hour before the terrain became unsafe. At a fork in the wash, the tracks disappeared again. One branch opened toward flatter grazing ground. The other narrowed toward the old winter canyon. Caleb studied both. "Which one?" Mara looked for another print and found none. Louise checked a muddy patch near the flatter route. Nothing. Owen stared toward the narrow branch. "That way has more trees. It also gets rougher," Caleb said. Mara remembered her own forgotten lesson. Shelter, enclosed terrain, a frightened horse seeking somewhere that felt protected. "We try the canyon branch." They had gone another quarter-mile when the rain thinned to mist. Mara stopped beside a fallen log and listened. Nothing. "Juniper," she called. Her voice traveled between the low banks and faded. No answer. Caleb checked the time. "We can't push much farther with the kids before dark." Mara knew he was right. The thought of turning back made her chest ache. Then Owen lifted one hand. "Wait." Everyone went quiet. "What?" Sophie whispered. Owen tilted his head toward the canyon. For several seconds, there was only dripping brush and distant wind. Then his eyes widened. "I heard something." Mara held her breath. "What did you hear?" Owen pointed into the narrowing darkness ahead. "A horse." Mara listened until the silence became painful. Where Owen pointed toward the narrow canyon, past those trees. Caleb looked at Mara. Could have been cattle. Owen shook his head. It was a horse. Mara called. Juniper nothing answered. They moved forward, staying together as the creek bed narrowed. Luis led around loose rocks while Caleb kept Sophie and Owen between the adults. 50 yards farther. Owen stopped again. There! This time Mara heard it too, a faint, high call carried through the canyon. Her heart lurched. Juniper! A clearer whinny answered. Mara started forward, but Luis caught her arm. Careful. We don't know what's between us and her. She forced herself to slow down. The wash curved around a rocky bank where storm debris had collected. Fallen branches blocked the easiest route, forcing them onto firmer ground above the creek. Caleb looked toward the children. Sophie, stay with Owen. I can help. You are helping. Stay close. Mara climbed around the obstruction with Luis, while Caleb followed a few yards behind. The canyon opened slightly beyond the bend. Mud covered the creek bottom. And there, near a cluster of brush, was a fresh hoof print. Mara crouched. The shoe pattern was clearer than anything they had found before. She came through here. Owen, still close behind Caleb, pointed ahead. There's another. He had noticed a shallow print beside a rock where the adults had been watching the ground directly in front of them. Then another appeared farther along. The trail led deeper into the sheltered canyon. Mara remembered what Owen had said. Water, shelter, familiar animals. They had spent 2 days imagining what a thief would do. Owen had simply remembered what a frightened horse might do. The canyon narrowed again. A fallen tree and tangled limbs crossed much of the wash. Beyond them came another whinny, louder now. Mara whistled the short 2-note call she had used with Juniper since the mare was young. For one breath, nothing happened. Then Juniper answered. Mara closed her eyes. That's her. Owen smiled. I knew it. They worked around the fallen timber rather than climbing directly over unstable branches. Luis found a narrow path along the bank. Mara squeezed through first and saw the buckskin mare 20 yards ahead. Juniper stood in a pocket of open ground enclosed by brush and storm debris. Her coat was streaked with dried mud, her mane was tangled, the halter was gone. She looked thinner than she had 2 mornings earlier, and her head hung low until she recognized Mara. Hey, girl. Juniper lifted her head and called again. Mara's eyes burned. She wanted to run to her, but the mare was tense and exhausted. Easy. I'm here. Juniper took 1 step toward her, then stopped. Mara noticed the uneven movement immediately. She's hurt. Luis studied the ground between them. Looks like she got boxed in when that debris came down. The creek route behind Juniper was choked with branches and a section of fallen trunk. She could move within the small opening, but had no clear path through, whether she had entered before more debris shifted or simply refused to push back through it. She had remained trapped there. Caleb and the children reached the opening. Sophie covered her mouth when she saw the mare. Owen stared silently. Mara approached Juniper slowly, speaking in the same quiet voice she used during training. The mare smelled of wet earth and sweat. When Mara finally reached her, Juniper pressed her muzzle against Mara's shoulder. Mara wrapped one arm around her neck. For 2 days she had imagined trailers, secret sales, lies, and roads leading away from Red Willow. Juniper had been only miles from home, frightened and following terrain that made sense to a horse. Mara looked back at Owen. You brought us to her. I only heard her. You knew where to listen. Owen came closer, only when Mara waved him forward. She pulled him against her with her free arm. Thank you. He leaned into her briefly, embarrassed by the attention. Can we take her home now? Mara looked toward the blocked wash. We have to make a safe way out first. Caleb and Luis began assessing the fallen branches, choosing what could be moved without shifting the heavier trunk. Darkness was approaching, so they worked carefully rather than quickly. Sophie stayed with Owen while Mara kept Juniper calm. The mare drank from the water they offered in small amounts, then stood with her head near Mara's shoulder. Piece by piece, Caleb and Luis cleared enough debris to open a narrow route. "We can try bringing her through," Luis said. Mara fashioned a temporary lead and turned Juniper toward the opening. "Come on, girl." Juniper stepped after her. One foreleg landed normally. Then the injured leg touched the ground. The mare flinched and pulled it back, refusing to bear her full weight. Mara stopped immediately. Juniper was alive. They had found her, but getting her home was not going to be simple. Mara did not ask Juniper to move again. She ran her hands carefully down the mare's injured leg, stopping when Juniper tensed. There was swelling, but no obvious deformity. "We clear the widest route we can," she said, no forcing her over anything. Caleb and Luis returned to the fallen debris. Sophie held a flashlight while Owen stayed beside her, watching Juniper. They removed loose branches first, then rolled smaller sections away from the wash. The heavier trunk remained, but Luis found enough room along one side for the mare to pass without climbing. By the time the route was clear, darkness had settled over the canyon. Mara led Juniper slowly. The mare limped, but followed, pausing whenever the ground became uneven. Caleb walked beside them without crowding her. "Easy," he murmured. "We've got time." They took nearly twice as long returning along the creek bed as they had coming in. When they finally reached accessible ranch ground, Ray and Hannah were waiting. Ray's shoulders dropped when his flashlight found Juniper. Thank God. Mara arranged for a veterinarian to meet them at Red Willow. Juniper was transported the remaining distance with as little strain as possible and settled into a small paddock near the barn. The examination confirmed what Mara had hoped, bruising and a soft tissue injury. Painful, but not catastrophic. Juniper needed rest, controlled movement, and monitoring, but the veterinarian expected her to recover. Mara stood outside the paddock after everyone else had gone inside. Juniper lowered her head over the rail. Mara touched her nose. "You made enough trouble." The mare breathed warmly against her palm. By the next morning, the disappearance no longer required guesses. The storm had frightened Juniper after Sophie and Owen returned to the house. A cottonwood limb had fallen across the old rear fence, pushing the wire low. Juniper forced through, snagging her halter and tearing it as she escaped. She followed the seasonal creek away from the ranch, toward sheltered terrain and the old winter cattle canyon. Storm debris trapped her there until Owen remembered what frightened horses looked for and led the search in the right direction. There had been no thief, no secret sale, no trailer in the night. Yet the secrets uncovered during the search had been real. Ray gathered the family around the kitchen table and placed every ranch account in front of them. "No more hiding numbers," he said. Mara read through the debts. Feed costs, irrigation expenses, and dwindling reserves. This time she did not react by defending the horse operation before anyone questioned it. "We can't keep doing everything exactly as we have," she said. Caleb looked surprised. "No, but discussing selling Juniper without me was still wrong. It was—" He looked down. "I'm sorry. I should have talked to you before I talked about her like she was an answer." Mara nodded. "And I'm sorry I decided wanting to sell her meant you'd betray me." Caleb gave her a tired smile. "That one took you long enough." "Don't ruin it. Ray suggested reducing part of the cattle herd." Caleb identified unused grazing acreage they could lease rather than carry themselves. Mara agreed to postpone non-essential horse breeding until the accounts stabilized. They divided responsibility for monthly financial records so nobody could protect the others by withholding bad news again. None of it erased the debt. It gave them a way to face it together. Juniper would stay. Later that afternoon, Mara found Sophie beside the paddock. "I should have trusted you enough to listen before accusing you," Mara said. Sophie watched Juniper graze slowly. I should have told you about Owen. Probably. Sophie glanced at her. Are we okay? We're getting there. Owen arrived carrying a small water bucket with both hands. Mara took one side, then stopped. Actually, you've got it. His face brightened. During Juniper's recovery, Mara gave him small jobs, checking water, helping prepare feed, and watching the mare's movement from outside the paddock. She did not call him a hero. He seemed happier being useful. Weeks later, Juniper was walking comfortably in a smaller recovery paddock while Mara and Owen repaired the rear boundary. They replaced the damaged post, tightened new wire, and cut back enough brush that the fence could be inspected properly. Owen worked on the new gate latch while Mara checked tension along the final strand. Why did everybody think somebody stole her? He asked. Mara considered the question. Because we were already scared and angry about other things. Your grandpa was hiding money problems. Your dad and I were fighting. Sophie was keeping your midnight trip secret. Once Juniper disappeared, every secret looked like proof of something worse. Owen tested the latch. But Juniper didn't know any of that, did she? Mara looked across the pasture. Juniper stood in the afternoon light, weight resting comfortably on all four legs. No, Mara said. She was just scared and trying to find somewhere safe. It sounded simple because it was. The adults had nearly torn the family apart by trying to fit the mare's disappearance into arguments that already existed. Owen had found her because he ignored those arguments and paid attention to the horse. Mara had spent 11 years believing that keeping Red Willow together meant carrying every responsibility she could reach. When the ranch struggled, she worked harder. When someone disagreed, she tightened her grip. When Juniper vanished, Mara had mistaken control for certainty and suspicion for action. Now the ranch still had bills. Juniper still needed time to heal. Nothing had become easy, but the accounts were open, decisions were shared, and nobody had to pretend that protecting the family meant hiding the truth. Juniper walked across the paddock and rested her muzzle against Mara's shoulder over the fence. Mara rubbed the mare's cheek beside her. Owen closed the repaired gate and pulled firmly on the latch. Good, he asked. Mara checked it once, then took her hand away. Good. Owen smiled and left it alone. So did Mara. For the first time in years, responsibility at Red Willow did not feel like something she had to carry by herself.